Insulin resistance. This is something that I think a lot of people deal with and they don't really understand it. Give us a kindergarten level explanation of what it is, how we can implement practices into our day to support it if we have it, and how to get tested for it.
Okay, so on a kindergarten level, insulin is like the key that opens the door to our cells and lets glucose in. So essentially, we eat glucose every day in the form of fruit, in the form of sweet potatoes, in the form of bread. All of those things break down and turn into simple glucose. And that glucose goes into our blood so that it can travel into our cells. And once it gets into the cell, it gives us that beautiful energy. It helps us do the things we need to do for our day. If glucose can't get into the cell because the cell can't hear the insulin, right? So it can't hear that there's a key there that opens it up to let the glucose in. That glucose hangs around in the blood, and all of a sudden we have high blood sugar. And over time in your labs, you'll find that your blood sugar, as you become more insulin resistant, as you have more time of that blood glucose hanging around and causing inflammation of your tissues in the blood, over time you will have a fasting blood glucose that's 90, 95. 100, 110.
And for perspective, what is a healthy level?
A healthy level is 85 or below in the functional range.
Okay.
And then they try to put you on metformin.
Yes, which, I mean, metformin also has a time and a place. There are certain people that are simply, not going to take herbs or make lifestyle changes and need a medication. And there's certain people that might not have access financially to certain herbs and lifestyle changes that also need a medication. So if there's going to be someone out there who's going to keep eating the standard American diet and doing what they got to do, metformin's a wonder drug. But we're speaking to the people who are in the wellness world and have access and financial privilege to herbs and all this good stuff. And we can do things differently. We can kind of take the natural metformin, let's say, through diet and herbs.
Okay, so keep going. So if it's 100, 110, 120.
Yeah, so that's where you become, once you're above 90, essentially, like the 90 to 115 range, you're considered pre-diabetic.
Okay.
And that is where you have a chance to really reverse that prediabetes. Once you're above 115 and you're in that type 2 diabetes range, you can more so manage your condition. And sometimes you can reverse it with diligence. You know, you're kind of using your diligent diet as your drug, right? And you're dependent on that. But mostly once you have type 2 diabetes, you can manage it. But a lot of your listeners who are just insulin resistant or who have PCOS and they haven't been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes yet, they've just been diagnosed with PCOS. So they're just insulin resistant and they're in that pre-diabetes range. That's where you have this beautiful opportunity to resensitize your cells to insulin and also to build muscle, because muscle is your disposal site for that excess glucose.
I'm going to ask you a stupid question. How long, maybe there's not a specific answer to this. How long can you stay in that kind of diabetic insulin range?
Some people can stay there for years, you know, and I think that that's a lot of women in their 20s when they slowly start to notice that they're getting puffier, that their periods are getting longer and more painful, that, you know, they're starting to have like chin hair growth, that they're, like all of these symptoms of PCOS that come up in your 20s when you start to experience insulin resistance.
You have time.
Yeah, you can be insulin resistant for, let's say, 10 years before you go into full-blown type 2 diabetes. But sometimes you're in that range and you have all of these unexplained symptoms and you're gaining weight. And now when you eat carbs, you're really sleepy, even though before you could totally process carbs and be fine. And your doctor is saying, oh, well, you know, your blood glucose is normal. Because really the functional range of prediabetes is like 90 to 115. And the functional range that you should be at is 85 or below. But most conventional physicians, if you're in the 90s or even the early hundreds, will say, oh, you're pretty much normal. You're fine.
It's like when men get their testosterone measured, like, oh, you're in the normal range. But the normal range is not, it's not the ideal range. I would say that.
Yeah. Yeah. You can also look at your fasting insulin. It's not quite as accurate because it's going to be somewhat reactive to the meal that you ate the night before and the time in which you ate. But for me, when I was very insulin resistant, before I lost weight, before I saw all of these changes and built muscle, my fasting insulin was like 11. And Dr. Lyon was like, we need to get that down. And then halfway through my journey, it was at a 7. And now it's at like a 4, which is ideal. I like to see it 5 or below.
And do you have to wear one of those glucose monitors to figure out what it is daily, or is it just a blood test every 2 months or so?
You can just get a blood test. You can also look at your HbA1c. That's a really powerful marker because HbA1c is going to give you a snapshot of your glucose for a 3 to 6 month period, let's say mostly 3 months. And so if your HbA1c is 5.7 or higher, you are considered pre-diabetic. So you want to be below like 5.6, 5.7. But you can just get that taken. Yeah, you can get your blood drawn every 3 months. You can look at your fasting glucose. You want it to be 85 or below. You can look at your HbA1c. You want it to be 5.7 or below. And you can also ask your doctor to test your fasting insulin and see if that's 5 or below.
I'm going to ask you another question because I know a lot of the audience that's sitting there, there's like, I'm never going to do a test. And there's some of them are saying that.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the, you highlighted some of these, what are some of the symptoms or things that you would notice if you were insulin resistant?
Yeah, you're going to be really tired after meals. You're going to eat a meal that's rich in beautiful carbohydrates like fruit, even healthy carbs. You're not eating cookies and sugar. And instead of it giving you energy, you're going to feel a crash. You're going to feel the itis after your meal. You're going to feel heavy and sluggish and not have energy. You will notice that you're gaining weight more easily over time. You're going to feel like your, quote, metabolism is slowing down. But in reality, you're actually just not able to utilize glucose for energy, and you're probably a lot more tired and thus more sedentary. And you can also notice hormone imbalances. Insulin resistance is a huge driver of hormone imbalances in women because what happens is when you have more insulin over time because you're insulin resistant, so your body is like, okay, let's increase this because the cells can't hear us. We're just going to send more insulin out and hope that the cells open up to get this glucose in. Your insulin is high over time. And chronically elevated insulin tells your ovaries to start producing testosterone instead of estrogen and progesterone, and especially instead of progesterone. So all of a sudden, women start to get symptoms of PCOS, where they start to have androgenic acne, which is like these like angry, kind of like the chin and cheek pimples. It's a very specific type of acne that comes from androgens. They also start to have head hair loss as well as body hair and chin hair growth. So you'll have kind of hair loss around your crown. That's really indicative of high androgens because the ovaries are producing testosterone. And you'll get a lot of chin hair. You'll have thicker body hair growth, waxing. You'll have to do it a lot more often. And you'll have longer cycles. So instead of a 28-day cycle, you're now going to have a 35-day cycle, a 40-day cycle. You might have symptoms of infertility. You might have cysts on your ovaries, and you might have poor follicle health. And you might also not be ovulating because as your ovaries start to produce more testosterone in response to high insulin, your body also produces more luteinizing hormone. And you need your luteinizing hormone to be low throughout the month and then high in a big spike when it's time to ovulate, because that is the LH surge that signals your body, hey, there's this big demarcation. But when you have high insulin, your LH is high all the time. So your body never even sees that demarcated spike and it never ovulates. So you can have anovulatory cycles. That can be a cause of infertility, or you can just not ovulate and not get your cycle for years.